To my family, I was the one who couldn't care to do war. 31 years old, renting a basement suite in Mississauga, driving a 10-year-old Civic with a cracked rear bumper, and working as far as anyone at Christmas dinner knew some vague government contract job that didn't pay enough to matter. My brother called it playing office. My mother said I should have gone into nursing like my cousin. My stepfather didn't say much at all, he just looked at me the way you look at a stain on a good tablecloth. What none of them knew was that the basement suite wasn't really a basement suite. The walls were reinforced, the windows were filmed, there was a secondary lock on the inner door that required a code I changed every 72 hours, and the equipment inside the monitors, the drives, the encrypted uplink was worth more than everything in my parents' house combined. I worked for a federal cybersecurity contractor. Not the kind you put on LinkedIn, the kind where your employment agreement has a non-disclosure clause with real teeth, and your supervisor's name is a code, not a person. To everyone at the dinner table, I was Ren, the disappointment, the one who didn't have a husband, didn't own property, couldn't seem to get her act together. To the people I actually worked for, I was something else entirely. I don't know exactly when my brother started resenting me. If I'm honest, I think he always did. He was 3 years older, and our whole childhood he had been the one with the grades, the hockey tryouts, the friends who filled the driveway on weekends. I was quieter, spent a lot of time in my room reading about things nobody else cared about. Network architecture, cryptography, the way systems talk to each other in ways people don't expect. My stepfather thought I was antisocial. My mother thought I was going through something. My brother thought I was just weird. He wasn't wrong, exactly. I was weird. I was just also very, very good at what I was weird about. His name is Adrian. He's 34, runs a mid-size landscaping company out of Brampton, and has this specific kind of confidence that comes from never having been seriously wrong about anything that mattered. He married younger woman named Becca who laughs at everything he says and has never once questioned him in front of other people. At least, not that I'd seen. They have a boy, 4 years old, who I genuinely love and who is the main reason I kept showing up to family things long after I probably should have stopped. My stepfather, I've called him by his first name since I was 16. That's a whole other story. His name is Gordon. He retired from the insurance industry 3 years ago with a pension and a recreational property up near Parry Sound, and he carries himself like a man who believes his opinion is the same thing as a fact. He was always harder on me than on Adrian. Looking back, I don't think it was malicious at the start. I think I just confused him. I didn't respond the way he expected a girl to respond to criticism, to praise, to anything. So eventually he stopped trying and started dismissing. And dismissing is its own kind of cruelty when you're 11 years old and just trying to figure out where you fit. My mother is the kind of woman who keeps the peace by pretending there's no war. She is warm and she loves me, I believe that fully. But she has spent 30 years managing Gordon's moods, and somewhere in that process, she developed a reflex whenever conflict started. She smoothed it over so fast that nobody ever had to actually deal with anything. My brother threw a bowl of cereal at my head when I was 9. My mother said I must have provoked him. I probably didn't. So that's the house I grew up in. That's the family I drove back to every holiday because I loved my mother and I loved her grandson, and because some stubborn part of me kept thinking that maybe this time it would be different. It wasn't different, it was worse. Last October, I came up for Thanksgiving. My mother had made the whole thing turkey, stuffing, the butternut squash soup my grandmother used to do. I got there early to help her, and for about 40 minutes, before anyone else arrived, it was actually nice. We had tea at the kitchen table and she told me about a book she'd been reading, and I felt, for a moment, like a normal person with a normal family. Then Adrian showed up. He was already in a bad mood when he walked through the door. I could tell by the way he set his keys on the counter harder than necessary, not quite a slam. Becca gave me a look that I'd learned to read over the years. Just stay out of the way. I tried. I went back to helping with the soup. It started over something stupid. It always starts over something stupid. Gordon mentioned a news story about a cyber attack on a pipeline company in Alberta and made some comment about how the government always hired the wrong people for that kind of thing. And Adrian agreed, and then one of them said something about people with fake tech jobs and laughed. And I knew they were talking about me without looking up from what I was doing. I didn't say anything. That's become a habit, absorbing things in silence. But Adrian pushed. He got a particular look when he wanted a reaction, a kind of half smile, and he turned it on me and said, "What do you actually do all day, Ren? Like, genuinely, what are you doing that's so important you can't even tell us?" I said it was contract work and I wasn't able to discuss the details. He laughed. Gordon laughed. Even Becca smiled, though I think she felt bad about it. "Contract work," Adrian repeated, making quotation marks with his fingers. "Right, so nothing." I set down the ladle. I said very carefully, "It's not nothing." He said, "Then explain it." I said I couldn't. He said, "Convenient." That was when my mother asked if someone could carry out the breadbasket, and the moment passed. But it didn't really pass. It sat in the room for the rest of the meal under the table, waiting. After dinner, Adrian and Gordon went to watch the game. I was in the kitchen helping my mother clean up when I heard them talking in the other room. I wasn't trying to listen, but the house is small and the walls are thin, and Adrian's voice carries. He was talking about money. Specifically, he was talking about my mother's money, the house, what it was worth now, what it would be worth when the time came. He said something about how it wasn't fair that Rand would be entitled to half when she hadn't contributed anything, when she'd never really been part of the family in any meaningful way. Gordon said something I couldn't fully hear. Adrian said she's not even trying to build a life. Why should she benefit from ours? I kept washing dishes. My mother was trying. I don't know if she heard. I think she did and chose not to hear it. She has that option and I don't. I drove home that night and sat in my car in the parking garage for a while before I went inside. There's a specific kind of tired that's not about sleep. That's what I felt. 3 weeks later, Adrian showed up at my door. I live in a converted row house. My unit is below grade. You go down 6 steps from street level to reach my door. Most people don't notice anything unusual about it. Adrian had been there once before, 2 Christmases ago, when he helped me move a piece of furniture. He'd commented then on how cozy it was, meaning small, meaning sad. This time he didn't knock. I was in the back of the unit, in the working space, running a secondary verification on a file set, when I heard the front door. Not a break-in, he'd watched me enter the key code once apparently, and remembered it. I hadn't changed it recently. That was my error. He called my name. Then he came down the hall. He stopped at a second door. The inner door, the one with the reinforced frame and the secondary lock. He tried the handle and found it locked. He called my name again. I came out into the hall and looked at him, and I said, "How did you get in?" He said he still had the code from before, which was a lie. I'd changed it after his last visit, and then I realized he must have gotten it from my mother, who I'd given it to for emergencies, which means she'd given it to him, which she'll deny to this day. He was drunk, not falling down drunk, but the loose kind, where the filter is gone. He looked at the inner door and then at me and said, "What's in there?" I said it was a home office. He said, "Open it." I said no. Something shifted in his face. It was fast and I recognized it, the same look from childhood, right before something got broken. He said, "You think you're better than us." I said I didn't think that. He said, "Gordon's going to change the will, you know." He stopped to a lawyer. "You're not getting anything." I said it wasn't my house and I didn't expect anything. He said, "Good. Because you've never done anything for this family, you've never been there for mom. You just show up and judge us and then disappear and pretend you have this. He gestured at the door, this big, important life. I kept my voice even. I said, "You should go." He moved toward me instead of toward the exit. He grabbed my arm first hard, the kind that leaves marks, and said something about how I needed to hear this, how someone needed to say it. I pulled back. He pulled forward. And then things happened very fast. His forearm went across my throat. I know the technical term for what he did. It's a lateral vascular neck restraint. It's what people mean when they say someone was choked. And it's in a different category of violence than a punch or a shove because of what it does to the body's system's oxygen, blood flow, consciousness. I had read about it in a professional context and I had never expected to experience it in my own hallway. My vision went grey at the edges. I heard him say something, my name or a curse I couldn't tell. I remember the wall against my back and the sound of something falling off a shelf, and then I don't remember anything. When I came to, I was on the floor. My neck hurt in a way that was specific and alarming. Adrian was gone. The front door was open. Outside, I could hear a bus going by on the street. Completely normal, as if nothing had happened. I lay there for a moment and I thought about a lot of things. Here is what my brother didn't know. He didn't know that the inner door, the one he tried to open, was not a home office door. He didn't know that the room behind it had a full 360-degree camera array that had been running continuously since I'd moved in, storing encrypted footage to an off-site server in a federal facility in Ottawa. He didn't know that the motion sensor in the hallway was connected to the same system. He didn't know that from the moment he'd entered my unit without permission, every second had been recorded in high-definition video and audio, time-stamped and automatically backed up somewhere he could never reach it, never delete it, never make it disappear. He didn't know that what he'd done to me in my own hallway was a federal offense under the Criminal Code, aggravated assault, unlawful confinement, break and enter, and that the footage of it was already sitting on a server that my employer's legal team could access with a single authorization. He left thinking I was just his weird little sister unconscious on the floor of a sad basement apartment. I got up, filed an incident report through my work system, which has a protocol for exactly this kind of thing, because the nature of my work means personal security threats are taken seriously, and called the RCMP non-emergency line from my landline. Then I made tea, because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. The investigating officer who came that night was professional and thorough. I gave a statement. I disclosed the camera footage. There was a process. There's always a process, but the footage was irrefutable, and Adrian was arrested at his home in Brampton the following afternoon. My mother called me 12 minutes after it happened. She was crying. She said she couldn't believe I'd done this, that I'd gone to the police over a family argument, that I'd ruined Thanksgiving and now I was ruining everything else. I listened. When she was done, I said very calmly that her son had strangled me until I lost consciousness in my own home, and I had done what any reasonable person would do. She said he didn't mean it. I said I knew he didn't mean for me to call the police. That part I was sure of. Gordon called 20 minutes later. His tone was different, controlled, strategic. He said that the family was prepared to handle this internally, that they had a lawyer, that going through the courts was going to be hard on everyone and I should consider whether this was really what I wanted. He said the word cause several times, which I recognized as a threat dressed up as concern. I said I wasn't interested in handling it internally. He said, "You're going to regret this." I said, "I already have a recording of this phone call." He hung up. What came out over the next 3 months was more than I expected and more than anyone in my family had anticipated. When my employer's security team reviewed the complete footage archive, because once you file an incident report, they review everything. That's just protocol. They found something else. Adrian had been in my hallway before. Twice, in fact, in the middle of the night, on dates when I'd been out of the city. He hadn't been able to get through the inner door either time, but he'd tried, and he'd looked through the keyhole, and on one occasion he'd tried to use a screwdriver on the lock plate. What he'd been looking for, I'm still not entirely sure. He'd made a comment once at a dinner about how government contractors were rolling in it, and how the jobs were all handed to people who knew people. I think he'd convinced himself I had cash somewhere. I think he thought if he could get into that room, he'd find something he could use. What he found instead was a federal investigation into Blake and Enter, theft of secure property, assault causing bodily harm. And because Gordon had then contacted my employer's HR department pretending to be my next of kin in an attempt to access information about my case file obstruction of a federal investigation. Gordon retained a very expensive lawyer. It didn't matter as much as he thought it would. The trial was held in Toronto, where the offences had occurred. It took 8 months from arrest to sentencing. Adrian received 18 months of house arrest, 240 hours of community service, a criminal record, and a permanent restraining order that covers me, my address, my workplace, and any vehicle registered in my name. Gordon received a separate conditional discharge and a fine that I was told was significant. His landscaping company lost 2 municipal contracts because of the criminal record. The recreational property up near Parry Sound, Gordon had been planning to transfer it to Adrian as part of an estate arrangement. That arrangement collapsed when the lawyers found irregularities in how Gordon had been handling a joint account he shared with my mother. That part is still being sorted out, and I am deliberately not involved in it. My mother has a financial advisor now, someone she found on her own, and I think that is the right order of things. My mother and I talk on the phone every 2 weeks. It's shorter than it used to be and more careful. She doesn't mention Adrian. I don't ask. We talk about her book club and her sister's health. And once she asked me about a recipe and I sent it to her and she said it turned out well. It's not the relationship I wanted. It might be the relationship that's possible. I still drive this Civic with a cracked bumper. I meant to get it fixed and then I just didn't. Some things you keep meaning to do and then they become part of the texture of your life and you stop noticing them. I changed my door code the week after the arrest. I change it every 48 hours now. Old habits adjusting to new information. Last spring, a colleague asked me why I'd gone into this kind of work, the long hours, the isolation, the things you can't talk about at family dinners. I thought about it for a moment. I said that I liked systems. I liked knowing how things were connected to each other in ways that weren't visible on the surface. I liked the part where something that looked like nothing turned out to matter enormously. She nodded like that made sense. I didn't tell her the other part, that I had grown up in a house where the person who stayed quiet was the person who got dismissed, and that somewhere along the way, I had decided that quiet didn't have to mean powerless. That you could say very little and still be documenting everything. That patience is its own kind of preparation. I wasn't the black sheep. I was just the one they never thought to watch. I still think about the moment I came to on that floor. The hallway light was on. Outside, a bus went by like it was any other Tuesday. And I just lay there for a second thinking, this is what it looks like when someone decides you don't matter enough to be careful with. Adrian didn't hurt me because he was evil in some dramatic calculated way. He hurt me because he had never once been asked to account for himself. Not when we were kids. Not by my mother who smoothed everything over before it could land. Not by Gordon who backed him at every turn. When you spend 30-odd years being told in small ways and large ones that your impulses are justified and your targets deserve it, eventually you believe it. That's not a mystery, that's just cause and effect playing out over decades. And I think that's the part people miss when they hear a story like this. They want a villain with a plan. What I had was a brother who had never built the habit of restraint because nobody had ever made restraint feel necessary. The consequences, when they finally arrived, weren't dramatic. They were just the natural weight of everything he'd done, finally showing up without anyone to intercept it. I've thought a lot about what kept me from becoming someone who just absorbed that and stayed quiet. Part of it was the work years of training myself to observe carefully, to document precisely, to trust systems over emotion. That kind of thinking doesn't stay at the office. It becomes the way you move through the world. It became the reason I had the camera array. It became the reason I filed the report instead of calling Adrian the next morning to talk it through. I knew what the evidence was worth. I knew how to use it correctly. But the other part, the part I'm less comfortable talking about, is that I made a decision somewhere along the way that my own safety was worth protecting. That sounds obvious. It isn't. When you've grown up in a house where keeping the peace was framed as the virtuous choice and making noise was framed as causing trouble, it takes real effort to unlearn that. It takes a kind of stubbornness that doesn't always feel dignified, just persistent. You get up. You file a report, you make tea, you do the next right thing even when your hands are shaking. What I did wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that even now. I didn't set a trap. I didn't engineer his downfall. I just refused to make it easy for him to escape what he'd done. There's a difference between those two things, and I think the difference matters ethically, practically, in terms of who you are when it's all over. The version of me that exists on the other side of that night is not angrier than the one who went into it. She's more precise. She's done with the idea that staying small keeps you safe, because it just makes you easier to dismiss. She knows that real integrity isn't about being liked by the people who benefit from your silence, it's about being someone you can account for when it's just you and the facts. I wasn't the black sheep. I was just the one they forgot to watch.